In 1775, Thomas Paine wrote a pamphlet stating that the freedoms of men can only be maintained by limiting the power of government. The pamphlet was called Common Sense, and today it still is common sense.
I'm April Giarrusso.
I'm Mark Zaccaria. This is Common Sense. Welcome back. There's lots in store for you in this week's show. If you have an idea that the revolving door at the state employment office is better than any carnival ride because they pay you, you'll hear how DCYF agrees. If you think there was something fishy about the prognostication that accompanied the Ocean State's presidential primary, you're right, and we'll explain. And if you're starting to feel like this spring has become the season for politicians to change parties en masse, we'll bring you even more evidence that's the case. So stay tuned and enjoy the ride. State Representative Patricia Morgan will also join us shortly for another of her in-depth interviews. This week, she'll sit down with Moderate Party founder and political activist Ken Block to bore in on the line item veto fight he's waging. In between segments of that four-part interview, April and I will pop back in to pose our favorite satirical question, are you kidding me? Once again, Portsmouth's own Jeff Richard will bring the broadcast home with his particular brand of wit and wisdom. This week, Jeff focuses in on the Social Security system. To get the show rolling, though, we will look to some analysis of several of the top news stories that are affecting Rhode Islanders this week. April?
Move over, Karen Macbeth. There's a new Republican in town. Rhode Island Senator Edward O'Neill of Lincoln quietly changed his affiliation last week. What makes this a little different than the Macbeth betrayal, pardon my literary wordplay, is that Senator O'Neill was the only elected independent in the Rhode Island Senate. Senator O'Neill managed to keep his switch under the radar for a surprising amount of time, at least until the primary election when he was noticeably on the ballot as a potential GOP delegate for Donald Trump. O'Neill hasn't decided yet if he will run for re-election as a Republican, but regardless, the damage has already been done, in a sense. Once word got out, he was booted from his office, which he shared with Senator Louis DePalma, a Democrat from Middletown, and sent to the Republican suite of offices. This switch raises the number of Republicans in the 38-member Senate from 5 to 6, but O'Neill is confident that his voting record won't change. He told the Providence Journal that he has always been very conservative, so the only thing that is changing is his label. He also stated in a State House interview that he first ran for Senate as an independent because he saw a need for someone who could serve both the Republican independents as well as the conservative Democrats in his district. Well, like I've done before on this show, let me welcome you to the party, and you let me know where I can send your complimentary free t-shirt. Mark?
Thanks, April. By now, everyone in Rhode Island has heard and reheard the news from our recent presidential preference primary. On the Republican side, Donald Trump won as expected, but he did so with a good deal more of the vote than he was ever anticipated to receive. For the Democrats, the Bernie Sanders win in and of itself was a surprise. On both sides of the House, the real story was just how wrong all the polls, and therefore all the pundits, actually were. There are a number of reasons for these errors. Let's take a look at some of them a little more closely. Technically speaking, the act of conducting a political poll is becoming harder and harder, especially this election cycle. The main reasons are that increased use of cell phones has made getting good listings of telephone numbers a real problem compared to days of old when the one and only phone company did all that for the pollsters. On top of which, the wide use of caller ID these days means that many of us just don't even pick up the phone after hours unless we recognize the incoming number. Those two shifts in American telephone culture really mean that it just costs more to do a poll than it once did because it takes many more tries to get the targeted statistical spread of interviews. Since political campaigns are perennially short on cash, the trade-off is that today we base polling results on much smaller samples than we once did. There's a price to be paid for that: inaccuracy. I think we are also seeing a fundamental shift in what the voters want this cycle, and I'd argue that it is being missed by the establishment of each political party. The common denominator between Trump and Sanders is that they are both outsiders, but also remarkably different outsiders than anything we've ever seen in American presidential politics. Sanders is an avowed socialist who thinks that the current administration's problem is they didn't spend anywhere near enough public money. Trump is aggressive to the point of ignoring decorum and almost any sense of propriety when reacting to his political opponents. Don't make the mistake of simply dismissing these two as crazy. If Trump is crazy, then he's crazy like a fox. What's really going on here is the American public showing us it is done with business as usual, at least for now. Hillary Clinton represents the most hidebound traditions of Democratic power politics, perhaps since LBJ. But that's not what the public is buying this time. Sure, Clinton is ahead in delegates, but that's because of insider privilege and her dragging superdelegates along with her despite what they want. Sanders, by contrast, is being propelled by a movement he triggered, but may not be able to control. The Republicans fielded half a dozen successful governors, any one of which might have transitioned to life in the federal executive far faster than Mr. Trump. But that's not what the public is buying this time. So for my money, I don't think we've seen the last of electoral surprises this year. And, incidentally, that's what this election is all about. My money and yours. April?
There's been a lot of news surrounding the Department of Children, Youth, and Families recently, so you'd think it would be hard for that department to keep anything tight-lipped. But of course, this is another example of a government institution not getting the memo that the word of the day is transparency. An official of Rhode Island's DCYF was placed on unexplained paid leave 7 months ago and recently returned to work last month, also without explanation. Brian P. Peterson is the Associate Director of Financial Management at the DCYF, and prior to his paid leave was acting as the Deputy Superintendent of the State Training School. The training school is where judges send delinquent youth. He came back to work in April, but has been assigned to the Executive Office of Health and Human Services, meaning that he is no longer associated with the training school. According to Brenna McCabe, the spokesperson for the Department of Administration, Peterson returned to work following the completion of an internal investigation. Meanwhile, he is retaining his $134,926 annual salary. No word yet on what the investigation covered or what actions were taken from the investigation. But last year, Peterson told the Providence Journal that the issue being reviewed related to a reporting protocol at the training school involving the actions of a subordinate and had nothing to do with the DCYF's financial practices. Of course, those financial practices were scrutinized in an audit last year. And I gotta say, I'm not surprised. Peterson makes $134,926 annually? I understand the need to put someone on leave during an investigation and to pay them, particularly if there's no wrongdoing on their part. But whoa, that's a lot of taxpayer money. Add that to the fact that Joseph C. Cardin, the training school superintendent, who was placed on paid leave literally days after Peterson, retained his $144,032 annual salary. Since September, he's made $85,193. I get that you need to be compensated fairly, especially for an important position like this. But remember who pays the salary? The taxpayer. Mark?
Thanks for that, April. In just a moment, we will hear from State Rep Pat Morgan and her guest this week, Ken Block. Before we do, though, we'll go to a fast recap of everything that's still to come in this week's edition of Common Sense. And, unless I miss my guess, we will also hear this week's first inquiry under the well-worn headline, "Are you kidding me?" So stay tuned. There's much more to come. Don't touch that dial. There's plenty more to come in this week's edition of Common Sense. Just ahead is a satirical look at one of the follies of the ruling class here in the Ocean State. We'll approach that subject by asking our favorite question, "Are you kidding me?" Then we'll move on to the first segment of Pat Morgan's interview with activist Ken Block. Finally, you'll want to listen in as Jeff Richard closes the show with his considered opinion on just how broken the Social Security system actually is. Come on, you were smart enough to tune in Common Sense. Stick around to finish the ride. Last week, in his Ocean State Currents blog, Justin Katz recounted a story originally reported by the Providence Journal. The tale was that of dispirited sculptor Donald Giarrusso, who left the Ocean State in a volley of invective after first coming to our shores in 2004. Giarrusso claimed he'd been lured to Little Rhodey under false pretenses by unscrupulous elected officials. Are you kidding me? Unscrupulous? Our guys? No. Mr. Giarrusso was quoted in Projo as saying he'd expected that the praise he received from politicians he spoke with before moving to Rhode Island would translate into assistance with mounting the kinds of shows and displays of his work that might gain him recognition and reward for his art. Well, sorry, Don, but it is never intimated to welders that they'll get government help in making money for their work. Neither do physicians, beauticians, electricians, magicians, or mathematicians have such expectations. It is true, though, that artists are different than all those others in that they seldom create for a commission. Rather, they produce what their muses inspire them to, and then try to hawk those wares after the creative process is complete. In that way, it is possible that Donald Giarrusso was unwittingly the subject of a different kind of art altogether. I could easily see how effusive local politicians might have hinted at the unspecified fame and glory they could bestow by virtue of knowing a guy or two. I might believe that these Pauls readily took credit for having the new sculptor in town front his own exhibits or to put expensive pieces on loan for no real reason. If that's the case, then this departing artisan was the recipient of the skillful ministrations of our elected artists. Con artists, that is. They got what they wanted, and he got to pay some more tuition in the School of Hard Knocks. Welcome to Rhode Island, sir, or should I say, fare thee well. Anyone actually from these parts would have seen it coming. Or would they? I don't know. Election season is upon us, though, so we'll all soon see. Are you kidding me?
Welcome to Common Sense Rhode Island. This is a program where we try to make sense out of the policies that affect your life and come up with common sense solutions. I'm Representative Patricia Morgan, and we have with us today Ken Block.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Great, how are you?
Welcome, thank you for coming. Gubernatorial candidate as well as a businessman who has done some really good things for Rhode Island.
Trying really hard.
Yeah, you
Trying
did the
really
waste and fraud study for the Chafee administration that you're not allowed to talk about.
Actually, they did publish an 18-page summary. I can talk about anything inside that summary.
All right, well, we know that it was good and it actually helped to find some fraud and abuse in the government, which is always important to root out.
It's critically important because we spend $9 billion plus a year here in Rhode Island. We spend more than $2 billion on Medicaid alone. And
growing.
In Washington, D.C., the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services estimates that waste and fraud in the Medicaid program approaches 10%.
Yeah.
Now, that could be as much as $200 million a year that's lost to waste and fraud just in the Medicaid program. That's real money no matter how you look at it. And I believe it's the responsibility of every government to spend taxpayer money as wisely as it can.
Absolutely.
And in this circumstance, governments across the country, not just Rhode Island, are failing to do that. And I feel very strongly that they must do a better job. And frankly, my business helps them find some of that fraud. So I'm dedicated to that.
Yeah. I just read in the Valley Breeze that they have charged a convenience store owner up there with food stamp fraud. $1.1 million is what he has stolen over 6 years.
Yeah.
Right, and you keep wondering, why aren't they catching this?
By the way,
what you did was to help them.
They're easy to catch. In food stamp in particular, identifying that sort of fraud is very simple. The challenge is FNS is the federal agency that looks for food stamp fraud. They're overly strapped. They're very thinly staffed. They don't have enough people dedicated to the task of shutting down food stamp fraud.
And why not? I mean, you would think that if you were really serious about spending taxpayer dollars wisely, you'd have enough investigators.
Right. There aren't. In all of New England, they have two.
Two.
Yeah.
All of New England.
Correct.
Great.
Yeah. It's not enough. And so I don't want to get, they have thresholds at which they won't even bother prosecuting fraud. And if the smart fraudsters come in underneath the threshold and they're able to steal money at will, basically. So.
But I remember reading about Mayor Giuliani when he was in New York City, and he had the broken window theory, that you go after even the little crimes, because the little crimes encourage others to commit those crimes and even worse crimes.
Right.
So we should have investigators. I think it's just, it's bad on so many levels, but that it also entices other people to say, well, they're getting it, I should get it too. And before you know it, you've got rampant abuse and fraud.
And what we know for a fact is that entities that commit food stamp fraud are likely to be committing sales tax fraud. They're likely to be committing cigarette tax fraud,
Yeah.
right? People who scam one program will scam other ones if they're able to. That's a known fact. And so when you allow the food stamp fraud to go unaddressed, you're really setting yourself up for a whole bunch of other problems in other programs as well. And when governments go after food stamp fraud, they're almost never interested in the individuals who receive those benefits. Nobody, no police officer, no judge wants to see a food stamp recipient standing in front of them in handcuffs because they sold their EBT card.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, no one has the appetite for that. But
No.
where you have convenience stores that traffic millions of dollars of these benefits, they're the bad guys. They're the
Well,
ones you want to shut down
And
for sure.
this guy had stolen 1.1 million.
Yeah.
That's not chump change,
It's not chump change.
right? That could have been food for a lot of families out there.
Do you know how much Rhode Island distributes every month in food stamp benefits?
I don't.
27 million.
Okay.
So that's a good chunk of 1 month's distributions, you know, and while the food stamp dollars aren't state dollars, they're wholly federal dollars. It doesn't matter. You have
I just
to go
paid
after
my
it.
taxes
That's
and
right. we all pay federal taxes
Yeah,
too.
we all pay it.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, let's move on. I am really glad that you did that. I don't know how much they are still using that study. I know that we tried to have them do it on a continuous basis, but I don't know if
Well, you know, I get
Rhode
dribs,
Island is.
I get dribs and drabs of information since that
You can't
study,
just do it once.
That study was made public in 2013, and I found out pretty recently by talking to some people still in government that some of our findings caused them to make some really big changes to how they did things.
I know they took dead
So,
people off, which was nice.
Right, and they changed some processes, and some other things that we looked at also caused changes, and that's really what things are about. I mean, the reason I got personally involved in politics was I wasn't happy with the direction that Rhode Island was going in, and I wanted to make change. Just change. I started a political party to make change. I ran as a candidate to make change. We need change here desperately. And the hard thing is figuring out what the most effective way is to make that change. And I think I'm really on it now, especially with the advocacy that we've done, the push to get rid of successfully the master lever.
The master lever
The
is
ongoing
gone.
push that we have.
We'll
to
see this
take-
election,
to-
what kind of a difference that makes.
I predict it will make a big difference. I
You
think we're
know,
going to see
the
a big
Democrats
difference.
have controlled Rhode Island now for 70 years.
Yep.
70 years. I don't think it's going in the right direction. So I'm hoping that changes like that, the master lever, which has helped keep that monopoly going, will make a difference.
Sure.
I mean, we also as a party, a Republican Party, we have to run harder and better candidates and that kind of stuff, but that master lever was something that stopped
Well, and let's talk
fair
about that. Look,
elections in a lot of ways.
all of the wags said you'll never get rid of it.
Got rid of
All
it.
right, and it was embedded. The legislature didn't want to get rid of it. It was like an immovable object. But we moved it with enough public pressure and the right set of circumstances. In the same way, the lack of a line item veto is something that the legislature really
Okay,
wants.
good
They don't want.
segue.
They don't want to. The legislative leadership does not want to see Rhode Island's governor have a line item veto because it takes power away from the legislature. So
Yeah.
they're dead set. But that doesn't mean you can't get it. You just have to work really hard and build the public pressure. And you've seen a whole bunch of opinion pieces in the paper. More than 1,000 people have gone to the website, www.lineitemveto.org. And through this pressure, and the Providence Journal's written some nice editorials about it, we build, and it's at some point, the legislature can't just tuck it into a file drawer.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we're at the point where we're going to get a decision, but I will tell you that just recently, Governor Raimondo was asked about the line item veto, and for the first time that I'm aware of, she publicly came out and said she all the way supports it and that it would be a benefit to her. That's the first time that's happened, and that's a big move for us because up until this point in time, she's been totally silent on the subject.
Yeah, it takes time to get these policies because they do chip away at legislative power. The Speaker, the Senate President, they want that power concentrated with them. I know that was the separation of powers.
Right.
That took, 10, 12 years to get
Exactly.
passed. How long did the elimination of master levers take?
Bills that were submitted for 52 years in a row.
52 years, all
Yeah.
right, so we finally got that done. And this line item veto, how long has that been kicking around? Quite a while.
Yeah, I don't know how long it has sort of been there at a low level. I know I started pushing it last year. That's when we started doing the public petitions and that sort of thing. But I don't know how far back the bills have been put in prior to that.
Okay, well, we're going to talk about it a little bit more,
Great.
and we'll be right back.
Rhode Island's rebooted marketing campaign is looking for your input so that, it doesn't come out awful, expensive, and we all hate it. Are you kidding me? Thank you. Thank you, Epic Decade, the company that is now leading the state's tourism effort. Thank you for listening to us. Common Sense in particular. I know that you're not just doing this because of all the ridicule this particular show has given to the Cooler and Warmer campaign, but I'm going to go ahead and believe that it is because of us. Because it makes me feel like I've made a difference in the state. And apparently now all of us can. Epic Decade is looking to make up for the missteps and mistakes of the recent past. The company has set up a storefront on Westminster Street in Providence where Rhode Islanders can place their own ideas, stories, and feelings about the ocean state on a large interactive map. The new campaign is called Make It Yours, or MIY Story Studio, which is a play on the DIY craze. There's also a video booth where people can share their favorite areas of the state and the experiences that make Rhode Island unique. If you can't make it to this pop-up studio, Epic Decade wants you to go online and share what you feel makes Rhode Island special so that everyone can have a voice in the new marketing effort. Epic Decade was one of 3 firms that the Commerce Corporation suggested for the campaign reboot, and the designer and CEO of the company, Seth Goldenberg, pitched right from the beginning that they would engage the public this way. It is excellent to see a company following through with its outreach plans, and it is wonderful that the state has learned from the disaster that is Cooler Warmer. Hopefully in the coming months we will see a new campaign that incorporates the true Rhode Island as told by the residents who love to live here. And so help me, if anyone gets sarcastic and suggests the words cooler and or warmer, we're going to have some very strong words. With all the hipsters in the area, that might just very well happen. Are you kidding me?
Welcome back to Common Sense. I'm Representative Patricia Morgan, and I have with me today Ken Block, who is now turned activist on the line item veto, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
44 states already have line item veto.
That's correct.
What is it?
The line item veto is a tool that the governor uses to go into a multi-thousand-page budget and take one individual line item out of that budget. It's a very important tool for a governor to have, and in fact, as you already said, 44 governors across the country have access to some form of this tool.
Have all those states gone in the toilet because of it?
No, in fact, there are academic studies that show that states with the light item veto control their spending better than states that do not.
They do.
So
because they want to justify every line
Right.
in the budget.
So here's
less pork,
that's right.
less giveaways.
So as I know you're aware, but for the viewers at home who may not be aware, the way Rhode Island's budget process works is the governor in January or early February submits an initial budget that then sort of disappears into the machinery of the legislature.
Well, we
And
hold hearings on
but-
it in the Finance Committee, but sometimes what comes out has little relationship to what was submitted.
Of course. And oftentimes things end up in the budget that don't necessarily get vetted out in public.
That's right.
Right?
Sure, like
and-
38 studios.
Exactly. Well,
It wasn't vetted. It just
wasn't-
showed up.
Right. And what you end up with, ultimately, when the legislature passes a final budget, currently, Rhode Island's governor only has the option to approve the budget,
The whole thing.
veto the entire budget, or allow it to pass in a symbolic gesture without a signature, which is a stupid thing to do. I don't know what the point of that is. With the line item veto, not that you would ever do this, but we'll use you as an example. let's say you were able to tuck a line item in there.
Let's not use me. Let's use somebody else.
All right.
Tucking somebody in
we'll
there.
use Representative X.
Okay.
Representative X.
Because this representative would never tuck something questionable in.
So Representative X puts in a light item to build a sheep research center in downtown Providence.
Okay.
Okay? And once that line item gets into that budget,
Impossible to
right
take
now
it
our
out.
governor has no way to get that out.
That's right.
With the light item veto, the governor could go, well, wait a minute. Nobody raises sheep in downtown Providence. This doesn't make any sense. I'm going to strike this line out. Now, when that light item gets struck, using a light item veto, the legislature then can possibly override and keep that line item,
Sure.
but they have to have a specific vote where every single legislator
That's right.
has to go on the record and say, I believe sheep processing in Providence is crucially
let's
important.
take it down to more, really, 38 Studios was a line item that was included in the last night of a budget vote, right? What about that Center for International Sports, whatever that was?
That was a grant.
That was a departmental grant, but it was
Yeah.
in the budget,
Yeah.
and that was $500,000, not chump change.
Right.
There are a lot of things that get in there, departmental grants, just spending that
The whole legislative grant
somebody
program.
wants. Well,
Is a line item.
that's right, it is.
Yeah.
There is spending, and all of those are lines.
Yep.
That a governor could say, that's spending that we shouldn't be doing.
Right.
And
the
take that
important-
out, not the whole budget.
And here's
just
the important thing. You force a debate,
on why it's good.
you bring transparency,
Mm-hmm.
and you force a vote on it. And if legislators truly believe it's important and they're willing to put their reputations on the line, they have the ability to say, I override the governor, and we believe this has to be in there.
But it makes them focus on that line item and say,
That's right.
38 studios, okay. Is this something that we really think is integral to the prosperity of Rhode Island?
That's right.
They have to have the debate on it.
That's
And
right.
they have to be on record.
So 44 other states have it.
Yep.
Rhode Island's one of 6 who don't.
Yeah, now,
They-
you had said that it can be overridden, and I understand that the Massachusetts governor, so what's his name, Baker?
Yep.
He vetoed $162 million worth of things in his budget, and they did come back and overturned him on $100 million of those.
Correct.
So it still comes back to the legislature if they think they have to have that spending. He was able to cut 62 million though, and that's pretty good.
That's right. And survived the override.
Yeah.
So you know that those programs that were cut
Were really
were
bad.
really bad,
Yeah,
right?
stinkers.
And that's the point. That's the beauty of the light item veto. Look, 44 other states don't have it wrong. 44 other states haven't fallen into anarchy because the governor has this
Sure.
power. And in Rhode Island, and this is my favorite example, and I'm going to use it forever because it's so awful. In Rhode Island Senate, they passed an awful bill to make essentially the act of a tree dropping its leaves
Yes.
be illegal. Okay, they wanted to attach
The
a
pine needle bill.
$500
Senator
criminal
Chacon,
penalty
yeah.
for, and it wasn't pine needles, it was any tree dropping. So it
That's
could have
right.
been acorns, it could have been leaves, whatever.
Leaves,
It was a stupid
weeping willow,
bill.
yeah.
And 26 senators, including the Senate president, voted yes, we think this is a good thing to have. Several other senators would have voted yes, they weren't even there that day.
You
Right?
know,
So-
people are without jobs and we're worried about that, but
Right. But my point is,
Still a
sheep,
bad job.
they're voting like sheep. They're not paying attention. They're not looking at what they're doing. They're just following the leader and voting yes, hitting that green button yes. With a legislature that works like that, the majority works like that. I know you don't. When the majority works like that, it's dangerous. And the light item veto is a necessary check and a balance against a legislature that's in zombie mode. Our legislature is in zombie mode.
well, that's an individual bill, but I know the budget. There are often things in there that are questionable, and representatives are able to vote them through by saying, well, it was part of the budget,
That's
and we
right.
wouldn't have done school funding if I voted against it, or we wouldn't have done this. And so they're able to hide
Yeah.
from the fact that they're passing through wasteful spending or spending that's for one particular special interest or something. The same with, there's sometimes just laws that are put into the budget because they're, a little bit questionable.
Right.
So it gives them cover, and they never ever have to justify that they gave $500,000 to the Center for Sports, whatever, International Center for Sports or something. Right. They never have to justify their vote for 38 studios because they say, well, it was part of the budget. Right? But if a governor can highlight that wasteful spending or that questionable spending and make them go back and revisit it alone, it's a powerful thing to control spending.
Because if it's done right, and you get the media involved and you really shine the light on what's happening, the truly awful things can be beaten back and removed.
And we control spending.
That's right.
And we are not a lightly taxed state.
No.
Right? We just, and even this year, I think the budget is projected to go up another 5%, in addition to the $45 million toll tax that we just passed, in addition to about $250 million worth of bonding that they want to put on. That's a lot of money coming from taxpayers.
Yeah.
We have to give the governor tools to cut out some of it.
No doubt.
Yeah. So, what do you think, what should people do?
Well, it's always difficult to get people at home to do things, but we tried to make this really easy. If you go to the website, www.lineitemveto.org, you can take about 60 seconds, you put your email address in, you put your mailing address in, you hit enter, and you'll send an email to the governor, to the Senate President, and the Speaker, pushing them to bring a light item veto to Rhode Island.
Okay, so you got your marching orders. Let's do it. We'll be back in just a moment.
For years, the big spenders in government have found it ridiculously easy right around election time to dismiss any criticism of their grandiose spending plans by saying they'll simply tax the rich to pay for it all. Here in Rhode Island especially, it doesn't take much in the way of political brainpower to see what they are really doing is taxing the poor. Are you kidding me? Well, as usual, I am not. Let's look at just a couple of the spending splurges our state legislature has gone off on over the last couple of years. There's the 38 studio moral obligation bonds. Nothing in the offer for this paper said anything about the state paying them off in case of default. In fact, the prospectus specifically stated that the state would not. There was even an insurance policy to cover payback in the event that the Schilling organization folded. So why are we, the taxpayers, carrying this bill? Because the insiders would offend their money contacts if we didn't. Okay, how about truck tolling? Polls indicated the voters hated the idea, and by a wide margin. There was also a perfectly workable plan floated by the minority to pay for infrastructure repairs by reordering spending priorities with existing funds. But the measure was forced through anyways. Folks, that's another $30 to $65 million per year drained from our productive economy, and they're not even going to fix the roads with it. Hey, the governor added almost $500,000 unappropriated dollars to her staff payroll just for additional public relations professionals. For that, she got cited by Fortune magazine. Her husband got a nice spread in Glamour. Her name was floated on the short list of females being considered by Hillary Clinton as VP candidates. What did we get? More deficit, of course. And where's all that money going to come from? Look, a 2014 study commissioned by the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank found that 47% of American families would not be able to raise $400 in cash to cover an emergency without borrowing it or selling something they already own to get it. That's us, ladies and gentlemen. We are the poor, and we are getting from our elected all we are getting from our elected leaders is more invoices every time we turn around. Well, if we're voters too, then we can do something about it in November. Or we could just roll over and take it, like all the other times. Are you kidding me?
Welcome back. I'm Representative Patricia Morgan, and I have with me today Ken Block, who has been working really hard to get the line item veto passed. There's legislation to get it passed, to make it a reality in Rhode Island.
So when we finished the last segment, you asked what people at home can do, and I encouraged them to go to the website www.lineitemveto.org. There's one more thing.
Okay.
I don't know when it's coming, but in the next 2 weeks, there's going to be a House Judiciary hearing on the light item veto bill. And what we desperately need is for you to show up and be there at this unknown time and unknown place where it's going to be and when. But we'll be able to announce it 2 days before it happens. Showing up in person at the State House makes a gigantic difference. So go to the website, send your email. If you do that, we're going to have your email address and we'll be able to tell you when this hearing is going to be. You don't have to stand up and say anything, but you have to physically be there. It makes a gigantic difference.
It really does make a difference.
Yeah.
When people come, leadership starts to understand that it is something that is important to people, to average voters. And this is an election year, so it's a good time for you to show up at the State House and really get this done. But there are some who have written letters to the paper and what have you that says, well, you can't let the governor mess with the budget because we have a constitutional requirement that the budget be balanced. Is that an impediment to having a line item veto?
No, in fact, the governor's light item veto doesn't endanger an unbalanced budget at all. In fact, it makes the budget stronger because it's cutting spending. When you add spending...
Doesn't create a deficit.
That's right. It creates a surplus. When you add spending, it creates a deficit. The light item veto doesn't add spending, it removes spending. So it helps to create a budget surplus. And in fact, the governor's light item veto might be the safety net that the legislature needs because we know, as you know, and what a lot of people don't know is the state has to estimate what their revenues are going to be, and that changes all the time.
And usually there's a deficit going into any year.
That's right.
Yeah.
So the light item veto gives us a stronger budget by making it possible to cut some things and help reduce the deficit before it really becomes a problem in the next fiscal year.
So that's not an argument that holds water.
I haven't heard...
A governor cannot add something into the budget, can only take something out.
Look, in the same way with the master lever, there was no valid argument to keep it. There is no valid argument to not have a governor's light item veto. None. You can't construct a rational argument for why Rhode Island's governor shouldn't have one, and 44 other governors do.
Yep.
Right? When Rhode Island stands out in a negative way to the rest of the country, we have to fix it. It's crucially important to get a light item veto. It will change the balance of power in a positive way for Rhode Island. It's really important.
It doesn't change it that much. It just really helps with spending decisions, my opinion.
Well,
it helps us control spending, and not just all spending, but wasteful spending.
What it does...
Because if it can be justified, it
Sure.
can be put back in. But if it can't be justified, it stays out.
It gives the governor more leverage in terms of negotiations across the
Sure.
board. And that's really one of the things that's missing. In the same way that we don't have enough of an opposition group right now in the General Assembly to force compromise, the governor doesn't have a lot of tools in his or her pocket to force compromise with the legislature.
Sure.
The way things are right now. The light item veto gives more
Another tool.
leverage to create compromise, and it's a really important thing.
I think it is. And again, we're not lightly taxed. The budget keeps going up more than the rate of inflation every single year. We need to do what we can to make it a more responsible document.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Other responsible things that can happen, legislative grants. I know that this is something that you are working on as well.
I hate those things.
I don't like them much either because it's taking taxpayer dollars and giving them sometimes to very good things. I'm not going to say they don't go to good things. They go to little league teams and hockey teams and different things like that. The point is, though, it only goes to some of them, not to all of them.
Correct.
Right? So why are the kids in Cranston more important and more deserving of tax dollars than the kids in Providence?
Because it's the Speaker's district.
Oh, is that why?
That's why.
Oh, okay. I figured that one out too. But you get the point.
I do. Look, the program is corrupt, okay? Whether it's the Boy Scouts or the baseball team or some far less deserving organization getting the money, we all know that less deserving organizations get them too. The problem is the program is two things. It's incredibly corrupt because the decision makers on who gets those grants are legislative leadership exclusively.
Yeah.
Okay? And so they use it to get political leverage over people. And they also self-serve in the case of Speaker Mattiello, who gave himself $126,000 of grants, and the next closest rep probably got $35,000, right? So
It's an enormous amount.
It is corrupt just for that reason alone. But
Buying votes.
There's even a worse reason why they have to go. It's because they're unconstitutional. They violate the separation of powers. Legislative grants start and end in the legislature. They never cross over to the executive branch. That is a violation of separation of powers. The legislature is taking applications for these grants, they're processing the grants, and they're allocating the grants. The only job the legislature should be doing is allocating the funds for the grants. All those other actions should be in the executive branch. Okay? And this is why it's so important for the governor to go after this, and I believe the governor, first of all, I know for a fact, the governor has the constitutional power
to ask the Supreme
Court to rule on this. And I believe that every governor has had this power. Why none of them have done it before, I don't know. But I believe that a responsible governor would challenge and get this struck down, because the governor's branch, the executive branch, is being impinged on by the legislature. And you need to draw the line in the sand, and you need to say, no, this shouldn't stand. And at the end of the day, it's because it's corrupt.
It is corrupt. It's taking taxpayer dollars and buying votes with it.
Yeah.
Right? And why it's allowed, again, why hasn't it been challenged in the past? I know the Republican caucus did.
Yes.
Nick Gorham and Bob Watson have tried in the past to
Right.
challenge
And
it
they
and
actually-
to get it up to the Supreme Court.
And they wrote, they had a terrific case.
Yeah.
I read their brief the other day. It's logical, it makes perfect sense, and they quoted cases in other states where they had the same exact constitutional language, the same grant program, and those programs were struck down by the Supreme Courts in those states.
As being unconstitutional.
As a clear, by the way,
not a permitted use of taxpayer
crystal
funds.
clear violation of separation of powers. And it's done at that point, right? The only trick here is getting this case in front of the Supreme Court. Once it goes, I believe it's a no-brainer. They're going to strike it down.
So when the Republican caucus did it, it was struck down because they didn't have standing. But the governor can get standing.
Right. So the case was never heard effectively because of a lack of standing that the Supreme Court determined that Gorham and company didn't have. But the governor, with his or her constitutional power to ask for an advisory opinion, has immediate standing to ask this question. And I believe the answer is clear, crystal clear, obvious. It goes down as soon as you clear the standing problem.
So another thing for you to write to your legislature and make phone calls about, because it's something that needs to go. We're going to take a break right now, and we'll be right back.
Rhode Island lawmakers are debating direct wine sales, claiming that the current laws are antiquated. Are you kidding me? Duh, they're antiquated. In fact, Rhode Island and Connecticut are the only New England states where you can't buy wine at a grocery store. You've got to go down to your local package store. But at Rhode Island, you also can't order wine because mailing any alcoholic drink directly to a consumer within the state is illegal. But Mother's Day is coming up, and all those online wine basket presents look so inviting. And let's face it, your mom doesn't want flowers that are going to wilt right away, or fruit displays that get mealy. The best way to show her your affection is probably to give her a nice stiff drink, or a smooth, fruity wine with an oaken afterbirth from a particularly stellar year. Lawmakers are proposing a gift basket license for retailers interested in packing a few bottles of wine, maybe with other goodies, into a neatly wrapped package to sell through the mail. Let's face it, in Rhode Island, if you want to get a bunch of cases of wine for a party, you can't. If you want to join a Wine of the Month club, you can't. According to an interview with Representative Stephen M. Casey in the Providence Journal, Rhode Island is an outlier for not allowing such methods of wine sales. Here's what Casey's bill comes down to. The new license to sell and ship wine would cost $100 and be available to any alcohol business licensed in any state, which includes manufacturers, retailers, distributors, etc. The license allows for said business to ship up to 24 9-liter cases of wine to each recipient annually, and the shipper has to pay the RI sales tax. The gift basket license would cost $200, and shippers can send up to 4 bottles in a single basket. Of course, local liquor stores and distributors are not happy about this at all. And they're right. We live in an Amazon age, where I can get anything shipped to my house in a day, so there's no need to drag my butt off the couch except to sign for a UPS package. It probably will mean that people will be shopping less at package stores, and it probably will be difficult to prevent sales to minors through the online system. This proposal is in the early stages of development, so let's see where it goes and how lawmakers propose to tackle these objections. But for now, if you want to get your mother a nice bottle of wine for her special day, you're going to have to get off your lazy butt and go buy it in person. Are you kidding me?
Welcome back. I'm Representative Patricia Morgan, and we have with us today as our guest Ken Block. We've been talking about different bad practices, I guess, in Rhode Island, and things that should be changed. Things that government is doing now that it shouldn't be doing. And in the news lately has been ethics reform. We know that a few years ago, because of Bill Irons and some of the problems that he had with the Ethics Commission, that the teeth of the Ethics Commission was really kind of removed over legislators.
Right.
They just really don't have much jurisdiction there anymore, and no way to punish legislators who go over the line. So for years now, we've been talking about restoring their power over legislators, but it's just not happening.
Right.
I don't know if you want to kind of chime in here. What do you think are the impediments? What do you think? How do you think we get to restore that ethical framework in Rhode Island government?
So, like the master lever, like the light item veto, the roadblock is the legislature. The legislature is, in my opinion, the root cause of a lot of the problems that we suffer from right now, and they don't want to give up any power, and they're not even thinking about the best interest of Rhode Island. They're thinking about their own self-interest, and that's the worst kind of government that you can get, and we suffer from that. The voters were crystal clear in 1986 when the ethics constitutional amendment was put into place,
right,
and the Ethics Commission was created. The Rhode Islanders wanted ethical oversight, independent, outside ethical oversight over the legislature. They were clear about that. The Irons ruling was a loophole that our legislature has happily walked right through, and they're in no rush to change it. Okay? Again, they're disserving the public, and in fact, they're thumbing their nose at the public, who made very clear what they wanted to have happen. And we're stuck right now in this no man's land where there is not ethics oversight over what legislatures do while they're doing their job. And that's criminal, in my opinion.
Well, it leads to corruption, and I'm tired of Rhode Island being a laughingstock, but I'm also tired of corruption affecting our jobs climate. Because quite frankly, companies don't want to come here and have to deal with corruption. They want to come and run their companies and work hard to make them successful. They don't want to come and have to deal with politicians who may or may not get them into trouble.
Right. And with the outsized power, unchecked power that the legislature has right now, that is one of the key stumbling blocks. And I don't know, I'm sure legislative leadership doesn't recognize it, but they themselves are one of the reasons that business doesn't come here.
Sure.
I think you're exactly right. So on the ethics side of things, what needs to happen is there needs to be a law or a constitutional amendment that restores the Ethics Commission oversight over the General Assembly. And the fight right now is about what that change is going to be. So I'm an originalist when it comes to ethics. And I believe we should do what the voters intended and wanted to have happen in 1986, which is the Ethics Commission has full oversight. We've seen a number of compromise bills that don't get there. They don't come close.
No, they don't.
And in fact, Senator Sheehan's bill incredibly would allow a legislator to advocate for a bill on which they have a conflict of interest, which is exactly what we don't want to have happen.
Right.
So,
if you're one person and you have a conflict of interest, there are seriously 112 other people who can make the choice without you getting really.
Right. Well, but if the speaker has the conflict, now it's a whole different problem. Because the speaker, even though he or she may recuse themselves from the actual vote, can stand up and make an impassioned speech about whatever it is they have a conflict on right now and be allowed to do that. And that shouldn't be allowed, because we all know that what the speaker wants, the speaker's going to get.
Yeah.
Right? So you can't allow conflicted speech and debate. And incredibly, the speaker has actually come out and said that's one of the weaknesses with Senator Sheehan's bill, and it's stupid because of that. So the speaker is theoretically, I've heard, coming out with his own version of an ethics bill.
We'll see.
And I'm eagerly awaiting what that bill is going to have in it, because let's face it, we have enough challenges in this state to not have to deal with
Even
no
the
ethics
perception-
oversight,
well,
oversight over the General Assembly.
Exactly. There needs to be, and we just don't need that perception of the rest of the world that we are an unethical state when it comes to our political leadership.
We have enough
problems.
elected officials who've gone to jail.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Right? And frankly, I think some of the ethics oversights that we have, for me, morally border on the criminal. All right, and we can't allow it. We can't have it. Look, the government is there to serve the people.
Yeah.
But we've entered some really weird frame here where the government has taken on a life of its own, and and we really have to get it back under control. That's the only way I can phrase it, and it's just broken.
Yeah.
It's just broken.
Just a few days ago, the Representative Lally, who had left the legislature last year, he got elected. Soon as he got into session, he withdrew, kind of nonsensically. I think he served about a year of that term and then decided to withdraw, so that they would have a special election. But very quickly he was hired by the governor, and we have a revolving door
Right, he violated that
statute.
law. Yep.
Yeah. Would the new ethics? I mean, I guess that's still in the ethics law. He's
Right. So there was an ethics complaint filed against his
Right.
activity. And
I think the Republican Party filed it,
right.
actually. Yeah.
And that was a good thing to have done. It was the right thing to have done. And I personally believe was going to be, and probably will be, found guilty of violating the revolving door. He's resigned his position because of the
Should
pressure.
never have taken it.
He should never have taken the
He knew he
position.
wasn't out of office a year before he took it.
I don't know why the governor extended the job offer to him. And I don't know why both the governor and or Lally didn't ask for an advisory opinion from the Ethics Commission, because they can turn those around pretty quickly, and I believe they would have said you can't take this job.
Yeah, but he took it anyway.
Right.
He took it anyway, and so it's that whole. We need an ethical framework. We need to tighten up the legislation so that there's more power in the Ethics Commission to kind of get this stuff done and keep us on the right side of ethics.
Right.
Okay, so we've talked now about some different things in this today, things that are broken kind of in Rhode Island, and things that should be changed, but we can't change them without the people's help.
Yeah. It's easy to lose heart and to take the totality of the things that aren't working well here and throw up your hands and say, what are we going to do? We just have to give up hope. Don't give up hope. What we saw with the master lever, what we see with the small wins that we get that are incremental, is you can make change. You can push this state, you can push our elected leaders to do the right thing, but it's got to come from you, right? As a legislator, you know how powerful public opinion can be.
Very powerful.
And the hard thing is getting the public to participate in the process. But when you participate, we make big change.
We can make big change.
Yeah.
And again, this is an election year. There are campaigns out there. There are going to be good candidates on the ballot, right?
Absolutely.
New people who will change, who will vote and put the pressure on to change these things.
Absolutely.
So that if your vote, your phone calls and your emails don't do it, they can help further that process. Because we need to get rid of legislative grants, get the line item veto passed, and get ethics legislation enacted. All good things that would help Rhode Island, our job climate, and our families. So please do it.
Sometimes I regret tackling subjects that turn into week-long projects of discovery. This week's mistake is Social Security, American style. The internet delivered me more choices than I imagined could exist. But they do, and you can go back in time to 1935 when FDR got Social Security through the Congress. Since then, the growth in the program and its sister Medicare have been monumental. Right now, the two programs eat up 40% of all federal spending. And you might be pleased to know that $107 trillion of unfunded liabilities exist. It would take 8 years of economic production to equal that cost, which is twice the entire world's annual GDP. Well, what's wrong? Lots. First unfortunate fact. Contributions are insufficient to provide promised benefits. Back in the dark ages of 1940, there were 42 workers helping the one retiree get by. Today, it is 3 to 1, heading for 2 to 1, with the tax rate rising. It is a classic Ponzi scheme. New contributions are used to pay off earlier contributors. The second problem is life expectancy. The Wall Street Journal carried an article on April 18th headlined, "The richer you are, the older you'll get." Written by Josh Zumbran, the article discusses data on people born in 1920 and in 1940. The comparison between men and women is correlated to their income levels. Example, looking at a man born in 1940, the data from the study of this particular man at the midpoint of his career shows him in the top 10% for his age group. If that man lives to age 55, he can expect to live an additional 34.9 years, to be 90. That is 6 years longer than a man whose career followed the same pattern, but who was born in 1920. For the men in the poorest 10%, they can expect to live only another 24 years, only a year and a half longer than his or their 1920s counterparts. How about the ladies? At every level of income, women live longer than men. The wealthiest ladies from the 1940s are living longer than the 1920s group, but the poorest 40% are seeing life expectancy decline from the previous generation. Now, all this is interesting, but the bottom line is we are lasting longer in drawing down the non-existing Social Security fund. Now, the third concern is increasing medical costs. Over the recent decades, Medicare costs have risen 3% annually above the increase in per capita gross domestic product. Put all this together, and we have a crisis of confidence. We mere private citizens don't believe that our elected officials are getting the job done. Right now, if you were a beneficiary of that portion of Social Security called disability benefits, you are concerned. Why? Because that trust fund is running out of money today. The New York Times reported in July of 2015 that 11 million people faced a deep, abrupt cut in disability insurance benefits in late 2016 unless the disability fund was replenished. The government reported that the squeeze on the disability program was, quote, but the first manifestation of larger financial imbalance facing Social Security as a whole, as well as Medicare, unquote. And Medicare Part B premiums paid by 30% of the 55 million people could go from $104.90 today to $159.30 a month. That's a 52% rise. Most people on Medicare have their premiums deducted from their monthly Social Security checks. These folks are protected from increases because their premiums cannot rise more than the dollar amount of the cost of living increase in their Social Security checks. So here's the bad news, though. There is no cost of living raise in Social Security checks again this year. Over the last 40 years, there have been only 3 instances of no cost of living increases, all 3 during President Obama's time in office. But if you are not on Social Security but need to use the disability fund, your costs are going up. Now, here's some useless news. Medicare spent an average of $12,430 per beneficiary in 2014. That's up 2% from the previous year. $4,900 of that went to hospitals, $5,400 went to doctors and other outpatient services, and $2,100 went to prescription drugs. Nice to know where our tax dollars are going. So what is the message here? Very simply, the Social Security and Medicare systems are in crisis mode. Well, we need to know what our elected reps are going to do.